You're watching Lunchtime Agenda, and I have with me today our political panel here in the studio with me, Greens MP Adam Bandt, of course, in the House of Representatives, and in the Senate, the new Senate, but not a new Senator, Bridget McKenzie, of course, from the Nationals representing Victoria. Thanks both for your time today.
Pleasure.
No problems.
Let's start on the big topic, the new Senate. Of course, Bridget, we heard Tony Abbott target Labor for doing deals in the House of Representatives with the man on your left there, amongst others. It's day one, really, of the shoe on the other foot, isn't it?
Well, I think it's important. The Senate's always been a place of negotiation. It's very different to the raw numbers that exhibit themselves in the House of Representatives, which the previous government found themselves having to deal with. In the Senate, we continually are negotiating because it's very rare indeed that any one side holds all the numbers in their hand.
Well, further to that point then, why did Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey talk about crashing or crashing through? And what you just said there makes a lot of sense. Do they need to perhaps realise what the Senate's about? Do you need to give them a bit of free advice?
I think the way the government is approaching the new Senate is completely appropriate. It's about treating each senator with respect. The Australian people have sent us all here to do their will in its various guises, and senators are very au fait with actually negotiating everything from a notice of motion to legislation, committee reports as part of our daily work, and I'm very, very confident in our leadership's team's capacity to negotiate our budget through the new Senate.
Adam Bandt, what about the Greens approach? Are you going to be a protest party or compromise, pass legislation you might not approve of, you might not be entirely proud of, but is better than what it replaces?
Well, we've got more Greens senators than we've ever had before. We've seen Janet Rice sworn in this morning from Victoria. That was fantastic. We'll take a principle approach to what happens here, and what you find is that on questions of principle, the Greens are probably the real opposition to Tony Abbott, and he promised no cuts to health or education or pensions, and we're seeing those promises being broken immediately. They failed their first test of minority parliament today. The government has failed to, in a motion to try and gag the debate on the carbon tax repeal bills. The Senate has already stood up to them, and I think Tony Abbott's about to find out what minority parliament is like.
OK, you spoke about principles. Well, OK, let's wind it back. The CPRS, the Greens said, we want our way, we don't want this diluted version of a price on carbon, if you like, but it seems to be extending to a lot of areas. You've got, for example, paid parental leave scheme. The Greens were oscillating. It looks like no now. The fuel tax, some support apparently pulled for that. I mean, are there any areas that you can compromise on? Is everything a principle for the Greens?
Well, we've adopted a very consistent approach to all of those. On paid parental leave, we've said to the government, put forward a costed proposal that's fully funded by the big business levy and that we know has the support of your side of politics. I mean, we've seen senators from his own side come out and say this thing is going to be sunk no matter what. Now, we're not going to waste people's time if it's not even going to get the votes from the coalition.
Is it wasting time or not wanting to be seen on their side if you can avoid it?
Well, we've got some pretty clear principled positions, and we've just said to the government, look, you're the government, put up a proposal. We've heard lots of rumours and lots of leaks to the media. We haven't even got a proposal yet from the government to be able to respond to, so I think that's pretty fair enough.
I will let you go, but just to also throw in a question while I'm at it, you're one of the few Nationals on the record as supporting the paid parental leave scheme, but how does it get passed? At the moment, you don't seem to be able to convince your own colleagues.
Well, I actually argue that point. It's been through our various party rooms twice. We've taken it to 2 elections. The majority of coalition senators and members completely back that election promise.
It did go through the first time, though, only after the opposition leader, the then opposition leader, had put his imprimatur on it. Then you've got to sort of give it the thumbs up then, don't you?
I've always given it the thumbs up. I think it's a progressive paid parental leave scheme that actually will go to actually increasing females' participation in the workforce. I wanted to actually clarify with Adam. You say it's been very clear the Greens' position on our paid parental leave scheme, one of the most progressive in the OECD, and I'm now hearing we've been very clear on what the parameters of that scheme are, and I heard that you actually support it, or you don't?
You've been clear on some parameters. For example, Commonwealth public servants that at the moment have a more generous entitlement. Will they get a lower entitlement under the new scheme, or will they be able to keep their more generous entitlement? People at universities who bargain, perhaps the employer agrees to give them a year off. Are those people going to be able to take something? No, you asked. Yeah. So are those people going to be able to take bargain on top of what they've got, or are they going to have the bare minimum? Is the scheme going to be fully funded by the big business levy, or are you going going to, where we've drawn a red line, dip into cuts to pensions to pay for it. So all of those things are pretty reasonable questions, and for a government...
As a matter of principle, though, Adam.
Well, we're saying to you, you give us the answer to that, and we'll respond in good faith.
A bit to flesh out there, perhaps it's good to have some policy debate here. We might be able to sort out a few policies by the end of the day. I might ask you as well about other measures of the budget that the government's trying to get through, because we just heard from Clive Palmer at the National Press Club. Now, if you missed it, he said he'll still support the repeal of the mining tax, but he won't actually support some of the other measures the government wants to repeal with that. For example, the school kids bonus, the contribution to lower income earners when it comes to superannuation. Budget's in a bit of trouble, isn't it, Bridget McKenzie?
Well, it's really, really important that we actually do deliver on the budget outlined by the Treasurer in May, because, as we know, there are significant structural issues within our budget from both previous Labor and coalition governments' policy settings over time, combined with
large
our demography.
yes from both sides.
Well, and I think that's got to be recognised. But we have to deal with it. I mean, we're paying $1 billion a month in interest. Now, that is an Adelaide hospital every 3.5 months, paid in full, not over 30 years. That's the sort of thing we're talking about. And when we hear the other side talk about fairness and equity, our side of politics wants to actually ensure that our nation can continue to be an egalitarian and fair society.
It's not just the other side, like right across the political spectrum. You saw it over the weekend, you're seeing it in the Parliament. People across the country are saying, no, hang on, you never told us you're going to have to pay more to go and see a doctor. You never told us there were going to be changes to the pensions. We're not going to have any
Let's deal with now, though, because Bridget McKenzie did also say, well, both sides have wrapped up the debt. There is debt, it is increasing. So what is the figure, Adam Bant, that the Greens will start to say that's the concern, that's where we top out? Let's give it as a percentage of GDP. Where is it concerning? 50%? Would that be a concern?
Well, the real question in terms of percentage of GDP is revenue. That's if we've got a problem, that's where we've got a problem. If we had revenue as a percentage of GDP at the same level as we had under John Howard, hardly a friend of the Greens, but if we had that same level of revenue coming in, you'd have between $10 and $30 billion a year extra.
But
let's fix the mining tax.
Okay.
Let's fix the mining tax.
Specifically on the debt, what percentage point does it start
We've got net debt around 11 or 12% at the moment. Now,
but
that
what
is
level is it
completely
concerning?
manageable.
Is there a figure you can put on it where you say that's a manageable 30%?
You could keep debt at around that level if we raised revenue as a percentage of.
So you would like to see it remain at about where it is now, with different measures to contain.
I think the way it is now is completely manageable. Really, the question is not so much how much is it, but what are you borrowing for? If you're borrowing to fund recurring expenditure, you're in trouble if that's your long-term plan. If you're borrowing to fund the infrastructure, public transport and the like, then people will accept that. But really, at the end of the day, why is it that the big miners and the big banks have been let off the hook, and they're coming after ordinary people to pay more to go and see the doctor, and they're making students spend 6 months of the year?
I'm just going to move on quickly. Of course, the carbon tax has been in place for 2 years, Bridget McKenzie. It looks as though your government's going to tick off the big election pledge to repeal it. But there's 11 bills in total here. The Clean Energy Finance Corporation, the Climate Change Authority, amongst others, could well stay in place. Are you going to use political capital to try to campaign to scrap them as well?
I think the carbon tax has been incredibly damaging for regional Australia, and it's fantastic that right now, down below where we're speaking here today in Parliament House, we're actually debating the repeal of that tax. When we see dairy farmers being charged $7,000 per annum, families that are grain growers, $5,000, beef growers, $2,000 per annum. That's very real impact on their family budgets. And to see the back of that as soon as possible, something the Australian people voted for, can't come quickly enough.
Okay, but how much did the Australian people vote to, for example, scrap the Climate Change Authority, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation? And as I said, do you try to spend political capital? Is there a campaign to repeal them as well, or is that you got rid of the main one, let's move on, try to pass the budget?
Well, I think it's about negotiation, and obviously the Minister has that at hand and will continue to talk to the crossbenchers.
Adam Bant, very quickly, and we don't have too much time left, but of course the Greens a few years ago, 2009, could have had the CPRS ticked off. Would having that in place now, benefit of hindsight of course, but would having that in place now be a better result than what we're looking at? No price on carbon at all, direct action?
No, I don't think it would have. And I mean, of course, you had Kevin Rudd, who was more interested in playing politics than getting a policy outcome, didn't even bother picking up the phone to the Greens to say what sensible amendments might you need to ensure this gets passed. Now, now we've got the Clean Energy Finance Corporation staying, it looks like, thanks to the crossbenchers.
So the package as a
several
whole, you
elements of the
prefer
package
the
staying,
CPRS.
and we may well end up with an emissions trading scheme. I mean, the government has just lost its first vote in this new Parliament, in this new Senate, as it tried to rush this legislation through. The crossbench said no, and that's maybe a sign of things to come.
To what extent, just very quickly, do you think Clive Palmer is going to push for this ETS?
Well, he's said that he wants to see Australia moving to putting a price on carbon when the rest of the world does. The rest of the world is moving. And so I think we're going to wait and see. I think it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks.
It will be. We're going to have to end it there. Bridget McKenzie and Adam Bant, thank you very much for your time today on Lunchtime Agenda. Thank you for watching. We're going to take you now to the Senate.